There's always one empty chair at my table. I don't think about it most days. It's just there, across from me, tucked in slightly, like someone pushed it back in on their way out and never came back. My father used to say a table without an empty seat is a table that forgot how to wait. I stopped understanding what that meant after he died. Now I just leave the chair there out of habit, the way you keep a coffee mug you don't use anymore because throwing it out feels wrong. The station was booked solid that Tuesday. 43 covers, half of them diplomatic staff I'd never seen before, all of them wearing the kind of quiet that meant something important was happening somewhere I wasn't invited. I was on the floor because Renata had called in sick and I wasn't going to trust the new guy with table 6 again, not after last time. I noticed the reservation error about 4 minutes before they walked in. One name. Vera. No title listed, which was either a clerical mistake or the kind of confidence that doesn't need titles. Party of 11, but the system had only cleared 10 seats. The 11th seat was mine. I should have moved. I was already standing up when the doors opened and the room did that thing rooms do sometimes, just went quiet all at once, like everyone remembered something they forgot to be afraid of. I sat back down instead. I still don't know why. Her security detail moved the way water moves around a stone, not stopping, just redirecting, filling every gap in the room without anyone giving an obvious order. I counted 6 of them before I stopped counting. They wore something that wasn't quite armor and wasn't quite clothing, and every single one of them was looking at a different fixed point in the room simultaneously. It was the most coordinated thing I'd ever seen, and it made me want to check if the back exit was still unlocked. It was. I'd propped it open earlier for a delivery. Small mercies. Vera walked in last. I don't know what I'd expected. Something more. More height, more color, more of whatever makes a person look like they own 1,000 worlds. Instead, she was almost unremarkable from a distance. Tall, yes. The skin was wrong, not blue like the Altians in the news feeds, more like the color of deep water when the light hits it sideways, somewhere between gray and something I don't have a word for. Her hair was pulled back in a way that looked architectural, like someone had engineered it rather than styled it. She wore no crown. No visible weapons. She looked tired. That was the thing that caught me off guard. Not the security, not the room going silent, not the way my heart did something embarrassing in my chest when she turned her head slightly in my direction. She just looked like someone who hadn't slept in 3 days and was very good at pretending otherwise. I recognized that look. I'd worn it myself for the 6 months after my father died, when I was running the restaurant alone and telling everyone I was fine. Her assistant, small, fast-moving, the kind of person who exists entirely in the margins, leaned toward her and said something I couldn't hear. Vera's eyes moved to my table. To me. Then to the empty chair across from me. Her assistant approached first. "This seat is required for the delegation." "It's my table," I said. "My shift ends at 10. "Sir? I'll move when my shift ends." This was not smart. I want to be clear about that. I'm not the kind of person who picks fights with Imperial security over a chair. I've never been that person. I once apologized to a parking meter. But something about the way she looked at that empty chair, not at me, at the chair, made me stay seated in a way I can't fully explain even now. The assistant went back. More quiet conversation. Then nothing happened, which was somehow worse than something happening. They arranged themselves around the large table the staff had prepared. 11 chairs, 11 members of the delegation. Food came out, our best diplomatic menu, the one we'd spent 2 weeks calibrating for Altian biology. Grain-based proteins, nothing acidic, temperature kept low. I was actually proud of it. Nobody touched it. Not one of them. The dishes sat there looking expensive and ignored while the delegation conducted what appeared to be a meeting in a language that sounded like someone playing a crystal glass with wet fingers. I pretended to read something on my communicator and watched from the corner of my eye. Vera had her hands flat on the table. She wasn't speaking. She was listening to someone across from her with the specific quality of attention that means you stopped actually listening about 5 minutes ago and are now just performing it. I knew that look too. She glanced at my plate. I was eating the leftover staff meal I'd made before service. A simple thing, rice with something green, nothing impressive. The kind of food you make when you're tired and you just want to eat rather than cook. She looked at it the way people look at something they don't have a name for. I picked up my fork and kept eating. "You are not concerned," she said. I looked up. She was still looking at my plate, not at me. "About what?" I said. "About this room. About what it contains." I thought about that for a second. The ventilation's been making a noise for a week. That concerns me more. A pause. Her hands were still flat on the table. "You are saying you are not afraid." "I'm saying the ventilation is loud," I said. "Whether I'm afraid is a separate question." She looked at me then. Actually at me, not at the chair, not at my plate. It lasted about 2 seconds and I had the uncomfortable sensation of being read very quickly by something much faster than I was. "Your food," she said. "What is it?" "Rice. Some herbs. Nothing interesting. You made it yourself. It's a restaurant. That's generally how it works." Another pause. Longer this time. "The food your staff prepared for us," she said, and something in her voice shifted in a way I couldn't name, not softer exactly, more like a door opening a centimeter. "It is correct. Technically." "But," I said. She didn't answer. She turned back to her delegation and the conversation in crystal glass tones resumed and I sat there with my fork halfway to my mouth thinking, "But it doesn't feel like anyone made it for you specifically." That's what she meant. I was almost certain. I finished eating. When I finally stood to leave, I pushed my chair in out of habit. Then I stopped and looked at the empty chair across from mine, the one I always left out, always slightly pulled back, always waiting. I left it exactly where it was. I found out about the food problem the way I find out about most things, by accident, while doing something else. It was the morning after the dinner. I was recalibrating the station's atmospheric filters in the kitchen, something I do every few weeks because the humidity affects the bread and nobody else remembers to check, when I heard 2 members of the station's diplomatic coordination staff talking in the corridor outside. They weren't whispering. People never whisper when they think they're alone. The Altian delegation's personal food supply had been incompatible with the station's storage systems. Something about magnetic field interference with the preservation units. The entire supply was compromised. The diplomatic kitchen had tried to compensate using standard Altian dietary guidelines, but the guidelines were apparently a simplified version of something much more complex: regional variations, individual tolerances, things that didn't make it into the official documentation. The delegation had eaten almost nothing since arriving. The negotiations were scheduled for another 4 days. I stood there with a filter panel in my hand and thought, that's not my problem. Then I thought, she looked at my rice the way my father used to look at food after he came back from the hospital. Like he'd forgotten it was allowed to taste like something. I put the filter panel down. I want to be honest about what happened next because I've tried to explain it to myself several times since and I haven't managed a version that makes me sound particularly rational. I went back into the kitchen. I pulled up everything I could find on Altian biology, not the diplomatic summaries, the actual biological literature, the kind that's written by researchers for other researchers and assumes you know what you're reading. I called Petra, who I went to school with and who now works in xenobiology at the university on Deck 9, and I woke her up at 6 in the morning and asked her questions for 40 minutes while she made increasingly irritated noises on the other end of the line. "Why do you need to know this?" she asked at one point. "Cooking," I said. "Adrian, it's 6 in the morning." "I know. The regional tolerance variations, are they documented anywhere accessible?" She was quiet for a moment. "You're cooking for the Altian delegation. Hypothetically. They have a dedicated diplomatic kitchen. Hypothetically, Petra." She sent me 3 research papers and a dataset that was technically classified for diplomatic use but which she sent anyway because Petra has always had a flexible relationship with the word technically. I spent the rest of the morning reading and the afternoon testing. I ruined 4 batches of something before I got the temperature and texture somewhere close to what the literature described as optimal. I didn't have half the right ingredients, so I substituted, which is either creative cooking or a catastrophic mistake depending on the outcome. At 11 that night I put together a small tray. Nothing elaborate. 6 items, small portions, the kind of thing you send when you're not sure something works and you don't want to commit to a full statement. I wrote a note on a piece of paper, actual paper, because I thought a formal message would get intercepted and filtered by someone before it reached her, and I wrote, *try these. It's not poison. Then I thought about that for a second and added, probably. Then I thought about that and crossed out the probably and just left, try these. It's not poison. I left the tray outside the delegation's corridor entrance and went home. I slept badly, which was not unusual, and by morning I'd mostly convinced myself the whole thing had been a strange impulse that would have no consequences. Then her assistant appeared at the kitchen door at 8:15. "The Empress will see you." I was in the middle of portioning bread dough. I had flour on my forearm up to the elbow. "Now?" I said. "Yes. I need 10 minutes. 5. I washed my hands. I did not get all the flour off. I followed him down 2 corridors and through a door I hadn't known existed into a room that was smaller than I'd expected for an empress, functional, sparse, the kind of space that belongs to someone who doesn't stay anywhere long enough to personalize it. Vera was standing at the far end looking at something on a screen that went dark when I entered. She turned and looked at me the way she'd looked at me the night before. Fast and complete, like a scan. "You left food outside our corridor," she said. "Yes." "Without authorization?" "Yes." "Using classified biological data?" I paused at that one. I had a conversation with a colleague. Dr. Petra Vasil. Dec 9 Xenobiology. She accessed 3 restricted datasets at 6:14 this morning. I made a mental note to apologize to Petra. "The food was good," Vera said. I waited. With some people, the pause after a compliment is where the actual point lives. "How did you know the 3rd item needed to be cooler than the documentation specifies?" "The documentation is written for general tolerance ranges," I said. "But the research suggested individual variation skews lower in high-stress conditions. You've been in negotiations for 2 days." I guessed. She was quiet for a moment. "You guessed." "Educated guess. Based on stress indicators you observed. Based on the fact that you looked tired," I said. "And tired people usually want food that doesn't ask anything of them." Something moved across her face. Not an expression exactly. More like the shadow of one, there and gone before I could read it properly. I thought I'd said something wrong. I was recalibrating what I'd said, running back through it, trying to identify the diplomatic error. "The empty chair," she said. "At your table." I stopped recalibrating. "You leave it empty every time you eat," she said. "I was informed it is a consistent behavior. Not a reservation. Not a mistake." "No," I said. "Not a mistake." She looked at me. I looked at her. We were both ostensibly talking about a chair. "My delegation will require meals for 3 more days," she said finally. "I am authorizing your access to our full biological documentation. You will be compensated through official diplomatic channels." "All right," I said. "That is all." I turned to leave. I was at the door when she spoke again, and her voice had that same quality as the night before. The door opened by 1 centimeter. "The note," she said. "You crossed something out." "Yes." "What did it say originally?" I considered lying. "I'm not sure why I didn't." "Probably," I said. Another silence. Then, very quietly, something that might have been the beginning of a sound she stopped before it became anything identifiable. I left before I could figure out what it was. The access to the full biological documentation arrived on my station terminal 40 minutes after I got back to the kitchen. It was extensive. I mean that in the way you mean it when you open a door expecting a closet and find another building behind it, not just dietary tolerances but metabolic cycles, circadian variations, the way Altian biology responds to different atmospheric pressures, to artificial light, to the specific frequency of the station's ventilation hum. I read it for 3 hours. The bread dough I'd left portioning went stiff and I had to throw it out. The thing that kept stopping me wasn't the complexity. Complexity I can work with, complexity is just detail. It was how much of it was about context. Altian eating isn't just about biology. It's structured around something that doesn't translate neatly into any word I know in any language I speak. The closest approximation in the literature was witnessed consumption, the idea that food eaten alone, without acknowledgement from another person, is nutritionally complete but experientially incomplete. Not unpleasant. Just lesser. Like eating in a room with the lights off. You can do it. It works. But something is missing that you can't quite name. I sat with that for a while. Then I went back to cooking, because thinking too hard about something while standing still has never helped me and moving my hands usually does. The next 2 days had a shape to them that I didn't notice until later. I would prepare meals, send them through the assistant, whose name, I eventually learned, was Servin, and who communicated primarily in a series of very precise nods, and occasionally receive written questions in return. Not complaints. Questions. Why this temperature? Why this texture combination? Why this order of courses? I answered them in writing because that seemed to be the preferred format, and the questions got more specific as the days went on, which I took to mean the food was working. On the 3rd day, Servin appeared at the kitchen door again. "The Empress would like to ask you something directly," he said. "If you are available." I was reducing a sauce that needed another 8 minutes. "I'll come when this is done." Servin looked at the pot. Then at me. She said directly, "The sauce will break if I leave it." A pause. "I will relay that." He disappeared. Came back 90 seconds later. "She will wait 8 minutes." I finished the sauce. I went. The room was the same. She was standing again. I got the impression she sat only when she decided to, which wasn't often. She was holding one of my written responses, the one from yesterday about the temperature question. She looked up when I came in. "You wrote that lower temperatures and high-stress conditions are a preference, not a requirement," she said. "That's what the research suggested. The research is general. You applied it specifically." "I made a judgment call," I said. "Based on observation. Based on the fact that the questions you sent back got shorter when something worked and longer when something didn't. Short questions mean less cognitive load. Less cognitive load usually means the body is doing better." I paused. "That's a guess too. Educated, but still a guess." She looked at me for a moment. "You observe people when you cook for them," she said. "I observe everyone. It's a professional habit. What have you observed about me?" I should have deflected. Any reasonable person would have deflected. I thought about it for a full second, which is actually a long time to think about something when someone is watching you think, and then I didn't deflect, because she'd asked directly, and something about the way she asked made me think she'd know immediately if I gave her a diplomatic non-answer. "You're not used to being cooked for," I said. "You're used to being fed. Those are different things. Being fed is logistical. Being cooked for means someone thought about you specifically before you walked into the room." I stopped. "You didn't know what that felt like until a few days ago. I think it surprised you more than you expected." The silence was longer than usual. "That is an assumption," she said. "Yes. It may be incorrect." "It may be," I agreed. She set down the paper. "My world has 400 dedicated nutritional specialists. 12 of them travel with me at all times. I have never gone without correctly prepared food in my life. I know, I said. That's not what I said. Another silence. She turned slightly away from me, which I noticed she did when she was processing something she hadn't expected. It wasn't dismissal, it was more like she needed to not be looked at for a moment, the way you look away from a screen when the text is too small and you're trying to focus. I looked at the wall while she did whatever she was doing. The empty chair, she said, and this time her voice had a different quality, quieter, not softer exactly, but more careful, like someone picking up something they're not sure about the weight of. You have not explained it. You didn't ask, I said. I am asking now. I thought about my father. About the 6 months after, about the restaurant, about eating alone at that table every night after closing and leaving the chair across from me because moving it felt like admitting something I wasn't ready to admit. I thought about how I'd eventually stopped thinking about why and just kept doing it, the way you keep a habit long after you've forgotten its origin. Someone used to sit there, I said. He doesn't anymore. She was quiet. Not the diplomatic quiet she used in negotiations, something different. The kind of quiet that means a person is deciding whether to say the thing they're actually thinking. On Altian, she said finally, we do not leave empty places. When someone is gone, the seat is removed. The table is reset. The space is closed. That sounds cleaner, I said. It is practical. Does it work? She didn't answer immediately. I wasn't sure she was going to. No, she said. It does not work particularly well. I nodded. We stood there in the functional sparse room with its absence of personal objects, and I thought about how a person who rules 1,000 worlds could have a room that looked like nobody lived in it, and I thought about my table with its one permanent empty chair, and I thought that maybe those two things were the same problem wearing different clothes. I didn't say that out loud. Some observations you keep to yourself. Tomorrow is the final day of negotiations, she said, back to her formal register. The door closed again. I will require meals for the full delegation. I'll have them ready by noon, I said. Servant will confirm the timing. All right. I turned to leave. I was getting used to leaving this room, getting used to the particular quality of the walk to the door, the way the conversation always seemed to end about 3 sentences before it was actually finished. Adrian, she said. It was the first time she'd used my name. I stopped but didn't turn around, because turning around felt like too much of a reaction, and I was trying to be composed about the fact that my first name in her voice sounded like something I hadn't heard before. The sauce you were making, she said. When servant came. What was it for? Staff meal, I said. Nothing important. Did it turn out correctly? Yes, I said. It turned out fine. I left. It had turned out fine. That part was true. I just didn't mention that I'd made enough for 2 and then stood in the kitchen for 10 minutes trying to figure out why before I put the extra portion away and told myself it was habit. It wasn't habit. I knew that. I just wasn't ready to say it yet. The poisoning attempt happened on the last day, which in retrospect was either very bad timing or very good timing depending on how you look at it. I found out the way I'd found out about the food supply problem, accidentally, while doing something else. I was in the cold storage checking inventory at 7 in the morning when the station's emergency alert system made a sound I'd never heard it make before. Not the fire tone, not the pressure alarm. Something lower and more serious, the kind of frequency that makes your body pay attention before your brain catches up. I came out of cold storage and nearly walked into Servin, which was disorienting because Servin had never come to the kitchen before. He always waited at the door. The official diplomatic dinner, he said. This evening. All delegations. I know about it, I said. I'm not catering it. That's the station's diplomatic kitchen. It was the station's diplomatic kitchen, he said. There has been a contamination incident. I looked at him. What kind of contamination? The deliberate kind. I put down my inventory sheet. The situation, as Servant explained it in the corridor in a voice so flat it took me a moment to register how serious the words were, was this: someone had introduced a compound into the diplomatic kitchen's water supply that was harmless to humans but would interact badly with the biology of 2 of the 3 non-human delegations present on the station. Not fatally. Badly enough to force the collapse of the negotiations. The station's security team was investigating. The dinner was in 11 hours. There are 11 delegations, I said. 7 non-human. I don't have documentation for. We are providing it, Servant said. The Empress has already contacted the other delegation leads. They have agreed to let me cook for them. To let you cook for them. I stood there for a moment doing the kind of arithmetic that happens in your chest rather than your head. 11 delegations. 11 different biologies, some of them documented, some of them in languages I couldn't read, all of them needing food in 11 hours that wouldn't hurt them, in a kitchen that was now a crime scene. I'll need my kitchen fully cleared, I said. Independent water supply verification. And I need someone who can translate the documentation in real time because I can't work from machine translation on something like this. The error margins are too high. I will translate, Servant said. I looked at him. You know 11 biological dialects. I know 14, he said, with the specific tone of someone who finds the questions slightly beneath them. I will be in your kitchen in 20 minutes. He left. I stood in the corridor for approximately 30 seconds doing nothing useful, and then I went back into the kitchen and started making a list. The next 9 hours were the most concentrated work I've done in my life, and I've worked through a kitchen fire, a supply failure during a full house, and the 6 months after my father died when I was running everything alone. This was different. This was the kind of focus that leaves a taste in the back of your throat and makes the world outside the kitchen genuinely cease to exist. Servant was precise, fast, and entirely without small talk, which suited me. He would read a section of biological documentation, I would ask a question, he would answer, I would cook. We didn't discuss anything outside the work. I ruined 2 preparations because I was working at the edge of my knowledge, and the edge of my knowledge has rough borders. I started over both times without comment and Servant didn't comment either, which I appreciated. At 4 in the afternoon Vera came to the kitchen. I heard her before I saw her, not her footsteps, but the change in how Servant held himself, a very slight adjustment in posture that I'd started to read as a kind of early warning system. I was in the middle of calibrating temperatures for the 3rd delegation's course and I didn't stop what I was doing. How far along are you? She said. 6 of 11, I said. On schedule. She came to stand at the edge of the preparation area, not in it, at the edge, the way someone stands in a doorway when they haven't decided whether to enter. I noticed she was wearing something different from her usual formal presentation. Not informal exactly. Functional. Like she'd stopped performing something. Servant says you refused machine translation, she said. Machine translation averages across dialects, I said. Averages are fine for general purposes. They're not fine for this. You could have said the task was impossible. It's not impossible. It is outside any reasonable expectation of your role. I looked up from what I was doing. With respect, I'm not cooking for your delegation anymore. I'm cooking for 11 delegations because someone tried to poison a diplomatic dinner. The reasonable expectations of my role stopped being relevant about 9 hours ago. She looked at me. I went back to the temperature calibration. You are angry, she said. I'm focused, I said. There's a difference. Is there? I set down the calibration tool. Picked it up again. Put it down again. Someone tried to use food as a weapon, I said. In my kitchen supply chain, in my station, during negotiations I've been cooking for. Yes, I'm angry. I'm also not going to let it matter until this is done. A pause. On Altian, she said. The people who prepare food for the court are considered. The word doesn't translate precisely. Something between trusted and defended. It means the cook's safety is the court's responsibility. That's a good policy, I said. It would apply to you, she said, if you were cooking in my court. We were talking about a hypothetical. We were absolutely talking about a hypothetical. I have a restaurant, I said. Yes, she said. You do. She moved into the kitchen then, fully into it, past the edge, and came to stand at the secondary preparation counter across from me. She looked at what was laid out in front of her. Ingredients for the 7th delegation, separated and labeled in servant's precise handwriting. Tell me what to do, she said. I stopped. You want to help, I said. This came out slightly flatter than I intended, because I was trying to process the image of an empress waiting for cooking instructions and my brain was taking longer than usual. I know the biology of 4 of the remaining delegations better than servant does, she said. I have been in diplomatic contact with them for 11 years. I can tell you what the documentation doesn't say. She picked up one of the labeled containers and examined it. Also, I have functional hands and you are running out of time. I looked at her for a moment. Have you ever actually prepared food? I said. No. Have you ever been in a working kitchen? No. Do you know what that container is? She looked at it. No. Put it down, I said. And wash your hands. There's a sink behind you. She put it down. She turned and found the sink and washed her hands with the focused attention of someone performing a procedure they'd been briefed on but never executed. I watched her for a second, the empress of 1,000 worlds washing her hands at my prep sink, and I felt something shift in my chest that I chose not to examine at that particular moment because I had 5 delegations left and 4 hours to go. Stand here, I said. I'll tell you what I need. She stood where I pointed. We cooked. Cooking with someone tells you things about them that conversation doesn't. Not big things. Small things. The way they hold an unfamiliar tool, whether they grip too hard because they're nervous or too loose because they're pretending not to be nervous. Whether they ask questions before they start or after they've already made a mistake. Whether they watch your hands or your face when you're explaining something. Vera watched my hands. She didn't ask questions in advance. She waited until she'd attempted something, assessed the result herself, and then asked precisely the right question to correct what had gone wrong. It was an efficient system. It was also, I realized about an hour in, exactly how she'd been handling the food I'd been sending to her room, not accepting it passively but analyzing it, forming hypotheses, testing them against the next meal. The written questions hadn't been complaints or requests. They'd been data collection. I found that out when she said, without looking up from what she was doing. The second day. The grain preparation. You changed the moisture content from the first day. You were sleeping better by then, I said. Lower stress. The tolerance range shifts. I did not tell you I was sleeping better. No, I said. She looked up. I was focused on the temperature calibration for the 8th delegation and I didn't meet her eyes, which was partly professional focus and partly self-preservation. You observed that, she said. Servant confirmed the delegation's meeting schedule had shortened. Shorter meetings usually mean things are going well. Things going well usually means better sleep. I paused. Also, you stopped having the specific expression you had on the first day. What expression? The one that means you haven't slept, and you're very good at pretending otherwise. A silence. Not the diplomatic kind. The kind where a person is deciding whether to be unsettled or something else. You said that before, she said. When we first spoke. I know. You remember what you said. I remember most things I say. I said. It's a habit. Professional hazard. She went back to what she was doing. I went back to what I was doing. The kitchen had settled into a rhythm by then, not comfortable exactly, but functional, the way 2 people develop a working pattern when the task is large enough that there's no room for anything except the task. The 9th delegation was the hardest. Their documentation was in a dialect servant described as archaic, and even his translation came with uncertainty margins that made me uncomfortable. Vera had met their ambassador twice, 11 years apart, and she stood next to me describing what she remembered of the meals at those meetings in a level of detail that surprised me, not just what was served but textures, temperatures, the specific quality of light in the room, what the ambassador's physical responses had been. You remember all of that? I said. It was important, she said. Most people don't retain sensory detail at that level unless they're trained for it. Most people do not have the political consequences I have if they misread a situation. She paused. I learned to remember everything. It became automatic. That sounds exhausting, I said. She was quiet for a moment. Yes, she said. It does. It was the first time she'd agreed with something I said about her own experience without qualifying it or redirecting it. I noticed that and filed it away in the part of my mind that keeps track of small changes, and I didn't say anything about it because saying something about it would have made it into a moment, and I didn't think she wanted it to be a moment. I thought she wanted it to be a thing she'd said in a kitchen while cooking, with no particular weight attached. I gave her that. We finished the 9th delegation. Started the 10th. At some point Servin quietly left. I'm not entirely sure when, because I was focused on the work, but I registered his absence the way you register a background sound stopping. The kitchen was quieter without him. Not uncomfortably quiet. Just quieter. Vera had gotten competent with the preparation tools in the way people get competent at things when they're intelligent and paying attention. Not skilled takes years, but functional, accurate, careful. She'd stopped gripping too hard. She asked questions at the right moments. The 10th delegation's final course was something that needed 2 people to prepare simultaneously. Timing dependent, the kind of thing where one person can't do both steps fast enough. I'd been thinking about how to handle it alone, and then I looked up and remembered I wasn't alone. I need you on the left side, I said. When I say now, you add the catalyst compound, the blue container, not the green one, and keep the temperature steady. Don't move it up or down no matter what it looks like. What will it look like? She said. Wrong, I said. For about 40 seconds it will look completely wrong. Don't adjust. She moved to the left side. I watched her find the blue container and position herself correctly, and I had a brief internal debate about whether to run through it again, and I decided she'd understood the first time. Ready, she said. We ran the preparation. 40 seconds in, it looked wrong. The compound clouded and the color shifted, and I heard her breathing change slightly in the way that means a person is overriding the instinct to intervene. She didn't intervene. She held the temperature exactly where it needed to be. It resolved correctly. Neither of us said anything for a moment. That was well done, I said. You were not certain I would hold, she said. It wasn't a question. I was about 70% certain, I said honestly. That is not a reassuring number. No, I said. But you held anyway. She looked at the finished preparation. Then at her hands. Then she set down the tools she'd been holding and she said, very quietly, in a tone I hadn't heard from her before, not formal, not careful, just direct. I have been in this kitchen for 4 hours. I have not thought about the negotiations once. I looked at her. Is that unusual? I said, though I already knew the answer. I have not stopped thinking about negotiations in 11 years, she said. We were standing close enough that I could see the detail of her face clearly, the specific gray-green of her skin in the kitchen light, the architectural structure of her features, the way she looked right now, which was different from every other way she'd looked since I'd met her. Not tired. Not performing, not tired. Just present, in a kitchen, at the end of a long day, with flour on her hands that she hadn't noticed yet. I didn't point out the flour. 1 delegation left, I said. Yes, she said. 20 minutes. Yes. We looked at each other for a second that was slightly longer than strictly necessary, and then I turned back to the 11th delegation's preparation, and she moved to her position without being asked, and we finished the work. The dinner was served at 8. All 11 delegations ate. Nothing went wrong. I sat in the empty kitchen afterward and ate a bowl of rice. The same thing I'd been eating the night she arrived, the same simple staff meal, and I set it on my table and I looked at the empty chair across from me and I thought about flour on an empress's hands that she hadn't noticed, and the way 4 hours of cooking had done something that 11 years of negotiations apparently hadn't. I didn't know what to do with that yet. I ate my rice and I left the chair where it was, the way I always did, and I went home. She left the next morning. I know this because I was at the station's observation deck, not to watch her leave. I want to be clear about that. I was there because the ventilation unit on that level had finally been fixed, and I wanted to confirm it wasn't making the noise anymore. That's the reason I was there. I'm aware of how that sounds. Her ship was larger than I'd expected. It moved without the mechanical hesitation human ships have, the way something moves when it was built by people who understood physics well enough to stop apologizing to it. I watched it go, and then I went back to work. The restaurant was empty that afternoon, Tuesday between lunch and dinner, always the deadest hour. I sat at my table. My rice. My fork. The empty chair across from me, slightly pulled back, the way it always was. There was something on it. I hadn't noticed when I sat down. A small object, flat, metallic, folded into a shape I didn't recognize. I picked it up. It opened the way something opens when it was designed to be opened by hands it had never met, smoothly, without resistance. It was a drawing. Done by hand, in a medium I couldn't identify, on material that wasn't paper. 2 chairs at a table. Both occupied. The lines were precise, architectural, the way her hair had been on the first night. The way everything she did was considered. I sat with it for a long time. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. Altian prefix. I answered. Said nothing. She said nothing. Neither of us hung up.